Most men misunderstand what it really means to ignore a woman. They think it is about arrogance, ego, or emotional punishment. They believe it is a cheap trick designed to provoke jealousy or force attention. And because of that misunderstanding, they either overdo it or collapse too early, turning silence into weakness instead of power. But the truth is darker, deeper, and far more psychological. Ignoring a woman is not powerful because of what you withhold. It is powerful because of what it exposes. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop offering emotional access, you are not creating distance. You are removing a structure her emotions unconsciously relied on. And when that structure disappears, something uncomfortable begins to surface inside her mind. At first, she does not feel pain. She feels confusion. Not loud confusion, not emotional chaos, but a quiet disturbance, a sense that something familiar is missing. The emotional feedback loop she expected is suddenly gone, and her mind does not know how to categorize you anymore. This is where dark psychology begins. Because the human mind is wired to seek control, not just connection. When someone no longer responds predictably, the brain interprets it as a loss of influence. And loss of influence creates emotional tension long before it creates desire. She may tell herself you are not important. She may rationalize your absence as coincidence. She may even feel relief at first. But none of that lasts, because silence forces introspection. And introspection is dangerous when emotions were left unresolved. Ignoring her does not make her feel rejected. It makes her feel uncertain about her own position. And uncertainty is where attraction quietly grows. This is the part no one teaches men. Attraction is not born from attention. It is born from imbalance. When emotions lean one way without resistance, they lose intensity. But when emotional certainty is removed, the mind fills the gap with imagination, meaning, and projection. She starts replaying moments she once overlooked. She reevaluates your presence now that it is no longer guaranteed. She wonders why your silence feels different from other men who disappeared emotionally but stayed energetically attached. Because you are not chasing closure. You are not demanding reassurance. You are not trying to be understood. And that creates a psychological vacuum. Dark psychology is not manipulation. It is awareness. It is understanding that emotional power does not come from control, but from detachment. The man who can remove himself calmly, without anger or explanation, becomes emotionally dangerous because he is no longer predictable. And unpredictability, when paired with self-control, is magnetic. But here is the real truth most men are not ready to hear. Ignoring her only works when you are willing to lose her. If your silence is driven by fear, it collapses. If it is driven by ego, it backfires. If it is driven by strategy, she feels it. But when silence comes from self-respect, from boundaries, from a man who knows his value, does not require validation, it changes the entire dynamic. Because now, you are not ignoring her. You are choosing yourself. And that choice is what shifts attraction from the surface to the subconscious. Before we start, a quick reminder. The real transformation doesn't happen on YouTube. It happens inside the community. If these videos have opened your eyes, what's inside will rebuild your mindset completely. It's not just a course, it's a brotherhood. A private space where men master attraction, emotional control, and the psychology of power. You don't join for a month. You join for life. Every future course, book, and lesson is yours forever. No subscriptions, no limits, just one decision that changes your direction. If you're serious about growth, discipline, and purpose, click the link below. Join the community. Enroll once, grow forever. Let's dive in. Section 1. Why ignoring her creates emotional gravity instead of distance. Most men believe that ignoring a woman creates distance, coldness, or emotional separation. In reality, When done correctly, it creates emotional gravity. Gravity does not push, it pulls. And the reason silence pulls is not because of absence itself, but because of the emotional imbalance that absence introduces. When you stop reacting to her the way she expects, you interrupt an emotional pattern her mind had already accepted as stable. Stability feels safe, but it also dulls intensity. The moment you remove yourself without drama, explanation, or emotional leakage, her nervous system is forced to recalibrate. She does not feel abandoned. She feels disoriented. And disorientation is the first step toward heightened emotional awareness. This is where attraction quietly changes shape. Before, your presence may have been comforting. Now, your absence becomes noticeable. Not painful yet, but meaningful. Her mind begins to search for reasons, because the brain hates unresolved shifts in emotional rhythm. Silence does not give her answers, it forces her to create them. At this stage, she is not missing you, she is reassessing you. And reassessment is far more powerful than longing, because it involves value. She begins to ask herself questions she never needed to ask before. Why did his attention feel different from others? Why does his absence feel heavier than it should? Why does this silence not feel like rejection, but like withdrawal? The answer is emotional gravity. You are no longer orbiting her. She is now orbiting the unanswered space you left behind. And humans instinctively move toward what feels unresolved and meaningful. This is why silence feels dark psychologically. It does not announce itself. It does not demand a reaction. It simply exists. And because it exists without explanation, her subconscious treats it as intentional strength rather than emotional weakness. Her ego may resist at first. She may tell herself she does not care. She may distract herself with attention from others. But none of that resolves the internal tension, because the emotional imbalance remains. You did not chase. You did not plead. You did not collapse. You stayed centered. And centered men create gravity. This is the crucial distinction most men miss. Ignoring her is not about taking power from her. It is about reclaiming your own. When you stop offering emotional energy freely, your presence gains weight, and weight bends emotional dynamics naturally, without effort. This is why attraction deepens quietly at this stage, not because she wants you more yet, but because she feels something has shifted. And when something shifts without explanation, the mind pays attention. Silence does not create chaos. It creates focus. Her focus. And that focus is what begins the darker psychological pull that most men never reach, because they break silence too early and collapse the gravity they unknowingly created. Section 2. When emotional gravity turns into internal conflict. Once emotional gravity is created, it does not remain neutral. Gravity always pulls inward, and in this case, it pulls her attention toward herself. This is where the real psychological shift begins, because her emotions stop focusing on you and start turning against her own sense of certainty. At this stage, she is no longer reacting to your silence consciously. Instead, her mind begins to feel unsettled without understanding why. The silence has now removed emotional reassurance, and without reassurance, the ego loses its balance. She starts questioning feelings she previously ignored, minimized, or postponed. This internal conflict is not dramatic on the surface. She may still appear confident, detached, or unaffected, but internally, her thoughts become fragmented. She revisits moments that once felt insignificant. She analyzes tone, timing, and energy rather than words. Your absence gives those memories more weight than your presence ever did. This is because the mind assigns value retroactively. When something is gone without explanation, the brain assumes it mattered more than it realized. Silence forces reevaluation, and reevaluation often leads to emotional inflation. What once felt casual now feels meaningful. What once felt optional now feels unresolved. Her logic tries to protect her. It tells her that you are replaceable. It reminds her of other options. It pushes her toward distraction. But emotional gravity does not respond to logic. It responds to imbalance. And the imbalance remains because you did not return to restore emotional symmetry. This is where the conflict sharpens. Part of her wants to dismiss you. Another part wants clarity. Another part feels challenged by the fact that you did not seek reassurance or validation. That challenge touches her sense of influence, and influence is closely tied to attraction. When a woman realizes she cannot easily move a man emotionally, her perception of him changes. Not because he is cruel, but because he is grounded. Grounded men do not react impulsively, and that stability feels rare in an emotional landscape filled with overinvestment. At this point, her emotions begin subtly contradicting her behavior. She may pull back publicly while feeling drawn privately. She may appear indifferent while checking for signs of you subconsciously. This contradiction creates emotional pressure because humans seek consistency between how they feel and how they act. Silence intensifies that pressure by offering no release. You are not present to confirm interest, but you are also not gone in a way that provides closure. You exist in an unresolved emotional space, and unresolved spaces demand attention. This is the stage where attraction quietly deepens without excitement or drama. It grows through internal conflict rather than external interaction. And internal conflict is powerful because it feels personal. She is not reacting to you. She is reacting to herself. Most men never reach this stage because they break silence to ease their own discomfort. In doing so, they relieve her conflict instead of allowing it to complete. But when conflict completes internally, it transforms into emotional clarity, and clarity often arrives as desire. Section 3. The point where internal conflict becomes emotional attachment. There is a precise moment when internal conflict stops being mental tension and begins turning into emotional attachment. This transition is subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but internally it feels intense and deeply personal. It does not arrive as longing or obsession at first. It arrives as awareness. She becomes aware that your absence carries emotional weight. At this stage, her mind no longer treats you as a variable. You are no longer one option among many. You become a reference point. Her emotional state begins comparing present experiences to the space you left behind. Conversations with others feel louder, easier, and strangely less satisfying. Interactions lack depth, not because others are inadequate, but because your silence created a contrast her emotions cannot ignore. This is where attachment begins forming, not through closeness, but through significance. Significance is created when something affects us without asking permission. Your silence affects her without demanding attention, explanation, or reaction. And because it operates beneath the surface, her ego cannot easily defend against it. She may resist this awareness. She may judge herself for thinking about you. She may attempt to emotionally downgrade you to regain balance. But resistance strengthens attachment when it is unresolved. The more she tries to mentally dismiss the feeling, the more it returns in quiet moments. This is the dark psychological mechanism most men never understand. Attachment does not grow through pleasure alone. It grows through emotional friction. When feelings cannot be categorized or resolved, they deepen. Silence prevents categorization. It offers no clear emotional label, no direction, no closure. At this point, her imagination becomes active, not in fantasy, but in meaning. She wonders what your silence represents: strength, detachment, self-respect, or indifference. And because the mind seeks the most emotionally charged explanation, it often chooses the one that assigns you higher value. This is why silence becomes dangerous psychologically. It allows her to project strength onto you without contradiction. You are not present to disprove the narrative her emotions are creating. And narratives, once formed internally, are difficult to undo. Her attachment now forms quietly, without permission, without announcement. She may still not reach out. She may still appear unaffected. But internally, a line has been crossed. You are no longer emotionally neutral. You matter. And when someone matters without demanding to matter, they gain power. This is also the stage where emotional vulnerability begins forming unconsciously. She may not want to lose you, even if she does not fully understand why. Loss now feels like something that would destabilize her emotional balance rather than simply end a connection. Most men never reach this stage because they confuse silence with distance rather than presence without access. They think ignoring means disappearing emotionally. But true silence keeps presence intact while removing availability. That distinction is what allows attachment to form without effort. Once attachment begins, her behavior will eventually change. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly. Curiosity increases. Emotional sensitivity rises. The desire for clarity grows stronger. And that is when she reaches the breaking point. Section 4. The breaking point, where most men lose everything. When emotional attachment reaches its breaking point, something inevitable happens. The tension can no longer remain internal. The emotional pressure that built quietly now demands release. And this is the moment most men misunderstand, misread, and ultimately destroy the power they unknowingly created. At this stage, she feels the weight of your absence clearly. Not as curiosity anymore, and not as confusion. It now feels personal. Your silence has become a presence in her emotional world, and unresolved presence is uncomfortable. She wants relief, not because she is weak, but because the mind seeks equilibrium. This is usually when she reaches out, but rarely in a direct or vulnerable way. The message is often neutral, indirect, or even dismissive. It may look casual, unnecessary, or insignificant on the surface. But beneath it lies a deeper motive. She is not asking for conversation. She is checking whether emotional gravity still exists. And this is where most men fail. They respond too quickly. They respond emotionally. They respond with relief, validation, or over-explanation. In doing so, they collapse the emotional structure that was holding everything together. The tension dissolves, not into attraction, but into certainty. And certainty feels safe, but it does not feel intense. The moment you re-enter without restraint, her nervous system relaxes. The unanswered questions disappear. The internal conflict resolves. And with that resolution, attachment loses its edge. What felt deep moments ago now feels manageable. This is the paradox of dark psychology. The closer you get at the wrong moment, the weaker the pull becomes. What she needed at that point was not emotional availability. She needed confirmation that your silence was not a tactic, but a reflection of who you are. That you are present by choice, not by need. That your emotional state does not depend on her reaching out. If your response communicates hunger, impatience, or emotional payoff, the illusion breaks. She realizes that your silence was an act of restraint rather than a natural state. And once silence feels performative, it loses its power. The man who succeeds at this stage understands something crucial. He does not rush to restore closeness. He does not seek clarity. He does not reward the reach-out with emotional intensity. He responds calmly, evenly, and without urgency, maintaining the same grounded energy that created the attraction in the first place. This keeps the emotional loop open. It allows attachment to mature instead of collapsing into comfort. It signals that connection with you is not guaranteed by proximity alone, but by alignment. Most men never experience this level of control because they mistake attention for victory. They think the moment she reaches out is the end goal. In reality, it is the test. And failing the test resets the dynamic back to where it began. True power at this stage comes from restraint, not withdrawal. You are no longer silent, but you are not emotionally exposed. You engage without chasing. You acknowledge without investing prematurely. And because of that, attraction stabilizes at a deeper level. This is the moment where ignoring her stops being about absence and starts being about posture. The posture of a man who knows his value is not negotiable and does not need to be proven. And that posture is what determines whether attachment fades or solidifies. Section 5. How a man either locks in attraction or loses control forever. This is the stage where everything crystallizes. The emotional gravity has done its work, attachment has formed beneath the surface, and the breaking point has been crossed. What happens next determines whether attraction stabilizes into respect or collapses back into familiarity. And the difference is not in what you say, but in who you remain while saying it. At this moment, she is emotionally open in a way she may not fully understand. She has reached out, re-engaged, or softened her behavior, expecting something specific in return. She expects emotional reassurance, renewed availability, or a return to the old dynamic. Not consciously, but instinctively. Her nervous system is checking whether equilibrium will be restored in her favor. If you rush to give her certainty, you lose. Not because certainty is bad, but because it is premature. Certainty without earned alignment feels unbalanced. When you offer emotional access too quickly, you remove the sense of value that silence created. The emotional structure collapses into comfort, and comfort kills polarity. The man who locks in attraction does something different. He remains present, but not permissive. He engages, but does not chase momentum. He allows conversation to unfold naturally without steering it toward reassurance, clarity, or emotional payoff. His energy communicates interest without investment and confidence without performance. This keeps the emotional frame intact. She feels connection, but not control. She feels closeness, but not ownership. And that distinction matters more than words ever could, because attraction thrives where autonomy is preserved. At this stage, her emotions begin seeking alignment rather than validation. She starts adjusting her behavior subtly. She invests more consistently. She becomes more attentive, more curious, more emotionally tuned. Not because she is trying to impress you, but because emotional gravity now flows toward you. This is where long-term attraction is born. Not from mystery alone, but from stability paired with independence. You are no longer distant, but you are not accessible by default. Your presence feels chosen, not automatic. And chosen presence carries weight. Most men sabotage this phase by overcorrecting. They either pull away aggressively to maintain tension or over-engage to secure the bond. Both extremes signal insecurity. True control lies in moderation. You allow the connection to breathe without gripping it. What she feels now is not anxiety, but respect. Respect for your emotional posture. Respect for your boundaries. Respect for the fact that your life continues to move forward regardless of her choices. And respect is the foundation upon which desire can sustain itself without burning out. This is the final psychological shift. Attraction stops being something you generate and becomes something she maintains. You are no longer managing her emotions. She is managing her investment. And that is the quiet endgame of ignoring a woman the right way. Not dominance, not manipulation, but alignment through self-respect. When a man reaches this point, he no longer needs silence as a tool. His presence alone carries the same gravity silence once did, and that is when attraction stops being fragile and starts becoming inevitable. Section 6. When ignoring her stops being a strategy and becomes your nature. At this final stage, something fundamental changes inside you. Ignoring her is no longer something you consciously decide to do. It is no longer a response to her behavior, her silence, or her attention. It becomes a natural consequence of who you are and how you live. And this is where true power settles permanently. You are no longer monitoring the dynamic. You are no longer asking yourself what she feels, what she thinks, or what she might do next. Your focus has shifted inward, toward your standards, your direction, and your self-respect. Silence now exists because you are not emotionally reactive, not because you are withholding anything. This is the level where women feel your presence even when you are not present. Your energy is steady, unforced, and unmoved by fluctuations in attention. And that steadiness creates a form of attraction that is quiet but profound. It does not spike emotionally. It anchors emotionally. At this point, her reactions lose their power over you. Whether she invests more, pulls back, tests you, or becomes emotionally open, none of it destabilizes your internal state. You respond when it aligns with your standards, not when it soothes your ego. And that detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. This is where most men misunderstand dark psychology and stoicism. They believe power comes from control over others. In reality, power comes from control over self. When your emotions are governed, your actions become intentional rather than reactive, and intentional actions always carry weight. When you speak at this stage, your words land differently. They are not trying to convince. They are not trying to impress. They are simply expressions of alignment. When you listen, your silence feels grounded rather than empty. When you walk away, it feels peaceful rather than dramatic. This is why women often describe men at this level as different or hard to read without being able to explain why. It is not mystery for the sake of mystery. It is the absence of emotional neediness. It is the presence of self-sufficiency. And here is the final truth most men never reach. When ignoring her becomes your nature, you are no longer trying to create attraction. Attraction becomes a byproduct of your emotional discipline. Some women will lean in, some will fall away, and neither outcome shakes you. Because now, your silence is not a reaction. It is a reflection of standards, a reflection of purpose, a reflection of a man who no longer negotiates his worth through attention. This is where ignoring a woman reaches its highest form. Not as absence, not as distance, not as manipulation, but as quiet authority. You are present without being available by default. You are open without being exposed. You are calm without being indifferent. And when a man reaches this state, he does not need to chase attraction. Attraction finds him. Most men will hear this message and still misunderstand it. They will walk away thinking, ignoring a woman is a move, a trick, or a psychological lever to pull when attraction feels uncertain. And because of that misunderstanding, they will keep struggling, cycling between attention and withdrawal, chasing outcomes instead of building identity. The truth is far less comfortable, but far more powerful. Ignoring a woman does not give you power. It reveals whether you already have it. Silence does not create attraction on its own. It exposes your relationship with yourself. When you ignore her calmly, without resentment, without expectation, and without emotional hunger, you are showing something rare. You are showing that your inner stability does not depend on her validation. And that is what changes everything. A woman is not destabilized by silence. She is destabilized by realizing that her presence is not required for your emotional balance. That realization forces a re-evaluation of value, because value is always attached to independence. The man who can walk away peacefully is the man who cannot be easily replaced. This is the dark psychology most people avoid. Control does not come from influence over others. It comes from mastery over self. When you master your reactions, you master the dynamic without effort. You no longer need to manipulate behavior, because your posture alone sets the frame. At this level, silence is no longer something you use. It is something that exists naturally when alignment is missing. You do not disappear to punish. You do not withdraw to provoke. You simply redirect your energy toward what reflects your standards.